Yes, it is.
And I was completely shocked. I couldn't place it. I couldn't define it. I just didn't know what to do.
Oh my gosh. I
And then
know.
she said the tech button. I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. The world is okay again.
Just a little shock. Now we're good.
Let's just
Yeah.
people would just say, oh, that's just part of the form.
Yeah.
Them being creative.
Yeah. It didn't used to be that way.
I know. We'll see what ends up really shaking out. You can only do so much until you're live, right?
Oh, wow, look how many people. That's impressive right there.
Yeah, for 8.
Thanks for coming.
It was so fun last night. It was so great to see everybody.
It was.
Absolutely. Always nice to reconnect with the program. And, it's so different.
Yes. Yes.
It's different just being post-pandemic. You're like,
Yeah.
what? How am I not a first year anymore?
But we haven't seen each other for so long.
Yeah.
I
that
know.
You guys, you don't know half the people.
I know.
You guys are a little bit better because you're in Omaha, but like Phil,
Yeah.
you haven't
I
seen
mean,
anybody.
The last time Kevin was
Yeah,
at one of those,
yeah.
he was not an alumni, and now he is
Yeah.
an alumni.
Yeah. Graduated.
Alumnus.
Literally.
Yeah.
Got promoted.
We like it when you graduate,
Full.
guys.
Right.
Full person mode.
Yeah.
Ronnie, is your next session in this room?
No.
Good morning. It's 8, so I think we should begin.
It's
I'm Kimberly Nye. I'm the Director of Talent Analytics, and I'd like to welcome you to this session on the context for innovation. The phrase innovate or die is accepted as fact by most, especially in the VUCA environment that we live in today. But others have questioned the veracity of this statement, highlighting prime examples of failure in innovating companies and stable companies succeeding by other means. This highlights the importance of having a clear organizational strategy tied to innovation. For IO practitioners, this means considering how to embed innovation and creativity in talent management practices. We must answer questions such as, who do we expect to innovate? How do we select creative individuals and measure their output? What is required to foster a culture of innovation? And do we require creativity from our leaders? And if we expect creativity from our leaders, do we expect differences in creative leadership across industries, levels, roles, or even gender? Or are those differences perhaps embedded in biases? In this session, the authors are going to examine their research on the context for creativity in organizational settings, and then discuss some practical implications. First up, we have Phil Simmons, who is a people scientist for Roblox. He will begin the session by sharing his research exploring the context for fostering a culture of creativity and setting a strategy for creative company operations. Dr. Zorana is a senior research scientist at Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. She will share her research exploring the contextual factors that inhibit or facilitate turning passion into creativity in the workplace. Then Nadine is a PhD candidate at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and she will explore the think creativity, think male bias by sharing her research examining gender differences and creative reputation across the C-suite. Dr. Kevin Mitchell is a senior organizational development analyst for Nebraska Medicine. He will share his research exploring the context for leadership innovation within the healthcare industry. And finally, Dr. Ronnie Rader-Pullman is the Director of Innovation at the Center for Collaboration Science at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. She is also the editor of the Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts. She will draw from her extensive contribution to research on creativity and knowledge of the creativity and innovation literature to provide a thoughtful discussion to conclude. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
Cool. Thank you. Can you hear? Cool. Awesome. Hi, I'm Phil Simmons. I am a people scientist at Roblox, and today I'm going to share the Roblox strategy for cultivating a highly creative software engineering workforce. Okay, cool. So the vision of Roblox is to introduce a new category of human co-experience by reimagining the ways people come together to learn, play, and work. In pursuit of this vision, we've built a global platform that enables anyone to imagine, create, and have fun with friends as they explore millions of immersive 3D experiences. So the technological and engineering challenges that must be overcome to enable a metaverse platform like Roblox are numerous, and engineers at Roblox deal with technological problems that are often novel to the industry. We're a leader in this metaverse space, so we're often finding ourselves being the first people to come across these specific challenges. So we need to create things like realistic and dynamic avatars, 3D layer clothing where anybody can create an article of clothing and it would automatically fit any shape or size avatar. And we also need to create systems like an immersive creation engine where it's equally as useful to maybe a high school student that's learning how to create 3D experiences to a professional video game developer who's looking to create an experience for a client. All of this needs to be delivered through a sophisticated cloud system that essentially streams all these assets and data to our users and be on a scale where potentially 1 billion people are concurrently accessing our service at one time. So yeah, Roblox is pretty exciting. It's a new kind of really popular company right now with kids. We're growing really fast. So the people science team has only been established maybe a little bit more than a year ago. So we're really excited to share the strategy that we're kind of building. But we're in the early stages of these long-term projects. So we have a long way to go. We're excited to share that. So. But yeah, we're just getting started here. So our first step was to understand the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are required for success at Roblox. We did this in kind of a traditional job analysis way. We did over 100 interviews with managers, leaders, incumbents across a whole variety of job families at Roblox, and found that among a variety of KSAs, creative problem solving was important across most of our technical roles. For this reason, we began developing an organizational strategy to cultivate a highly creative workforce. Our strategy includes hiring for creative problem solving ability in our selection process, examining creativity and innovation as part of our cultural surveys, and operationalizing creative behavior as a skill that can be developed over a career. So hiring for creativity. Our intent's not to make judgments on how creative the outcome of a candidate is, but rather to capture information about the creative problem-solving process or the process of finding creative solutions to problems. To do so, we developed a scoreable and scalable task inside of Roblox that allows candidates to demonstrate their abilities to identify problems, ideate, and iterate solutions to that problem based on real-time feedback, and engage in divergent thinking as they come up with multiple strategies to solve a single problem. So our assessment asks participants to design robots to navigate an obstacle course. The obstacle course consists of a variety of different terrains, or multiple terrains, each posing a unique problem that needs to be solved. And it can be solved using different strategies. So participants are asked to build robots to navigate this terrain, and we're asking them specifically to build as many successful robots, as many unique robots that can successfully reach the target as possible. Participants design robots using a variety of parts, each corresponding to a potential solution strategy to the obstacle course. And at any time, a robot can be tested for the candidate to collect feedback on the specific design of the robot. And there's no penalty for testing unsuccessful robots. Instead, this trial and error process is a mechanism for participants to learn about each part and iterate on their overall robot design as they try to find as many solutions as possible to the problem. So this assessment design allows us to collect telemetry data corresponding to the ideation and iteration process, as well as the degree to which participants are engaging in divergent thinking behaviors as they design and test dozens of robots over the test period. So from field test results, we found distinct measures of both participant ideation and divergent thinking ability from our scoring model. Both were highly reliable and converged with related cognitive skills assessments. Overall, participants believed that our creative problem-solving assessment was engaging and required a high level of creative ability. We also found that candidates are largely neutral on their perceptions of the difficulty of the task and the job relevance and perceived fairness of the task. So these are three areas that we want to continue to evaluate as we develop the product further. The next phase of this project is to establish evidence of predictive validity, which is ongoing. And to do that, we need to have a good criterion measure of creative problem-solving ability on the job. So, so at Roblox, we have this performance evaluation and professional development program called RoGrow. This program provides clear definitions of the different competencies that we're looking to evaluate employees on. And you can see in this slide, build creative solutions as part of our pillar related to innovation. There's other competencies like curiosity, systems thinking, and long-term vision alignment. But by providing a distinct measure of what creative problem solving is, we have all our managers kind of in the same mindset on how we're looking to evaluate this on a 6-month basis. To get kind of further into the details of how we evaluate creative problem solving ability here is, what we expect for creative problem solving varies on job family. So what we expect for a software engineer in their creative pursuits at Roblox is going to be different than, say, a talent acquisition specialist. And within software engineering, it's also going to vary by level. So a junior software engineer is, early in career, maybe hasn't had a lot of experience in exploring creativity in the field. So it's really about them exploring and observing and learning their craft. And as you go to a more senior role, technical director or principals, our expectations are that you're going to be taking your knowledge from maybe domains outside of software engineering to find inspiration for solutions and lead teams using those examples. So for layered clothing, there was inspiration found in how rocket designs are made and how air kind of moves across a rocket going through space. We can apply that to how our layered clothing technology works and drapes over different bodies and morphs different bodies. So those are examples of how we expect these higher level positions to lead this creative thought. Finally, we want to cultivate a culture of creativity. So we have two culture surveys that we've issued so far. One is the perceptions that employees have about manager behaviors for supporting creativity in the workplace. And it's really about whether employees are experiencing management that is promoting the pursuit of creativity and creative ideas, building collaborative relationships, and leading teams through obstacles and constraints that are placed on their projects. We also examined, we also have a cultural survey that we issued related to perceptions of the kind of overall innovation climate or culture. So this is more about how employees themselves feel creativity is being supported, aside from the manager behaviors. So are there efforts to learn and to value creativity as a pursuit? And is there an effort to actually implement creative ideas and generate innovation? We examined both of these kind of to understand the relationship that leadership behaviors have on these employee perceptions of the overall climate. And we see relationships across all of these manager behaviors with the climate for innovation. So the more that managers are engaging in these innovative, supportive behaviors, the more employees have a propensity for innovation and see the value in innovation as a pursuit, as well as the effectiveness of implementing innovations and creative ideas. So this is a great way for us to begin to take the results of the survey and provide developmental feedback to managers as they look for ways or look to improve their ability to generate innovations and support the creativity of their employees. Like I said, this is all kind of new for Roblox, and our team, as we join and kind of make adjustments to the organization's approach to creativity and innovation. If you have questions, ideas, if you think the game-based assessment we're designing is cool and you have an idea for us to improve it, please reach out to myself, Jacob, or Jack, and we're happy to chat and maybe do some great collaborations. So thanks.
Good morning, and thank you for being here at 8 a.m. So great seeing you with all your bodies here after 2 years of being in boxes. So today I would like to talk to you about adding context to the relationship between passion and creativity. And we know that creativity is thinking and it's action towards something that is original, outcomes that are original and also appropriate or effective for a particular context. And we have also learned a lot about how creativity happens at work. So we know that creativity at work comes from, is inspired and moved by motivation, such as passion, which is theoretically important for creativity at work, and also the domain of autonomy and different factors related to autonomy contributing to creativity and work. And finally, and Phil has touched on this, support for creativity and work. Those are big buckets that we know are important for work creativity. So here, I want to talk about passion. And that is a motivational construct, and we are asking in this research how passionate are people for their work. And we are basing this research on the model of passion by Julia Muller, and that model is has been formulated based on a large survey of literature on passion across different subfields of psychology and looking for common aspects of passion that emerge from all these different models. And it distinguishes 4 different aspects. indentation, intentions to engage and persist with the object of passion, identification with work, so becoming work being a big part of one's identity, long-term goals, wanting to engage with long-term goals related to work, and then desire to engage. And these four aspects are really part of two larger facets. The first three are part of commitment to work, and the fourth one is emotional one. It's activated emotion approach towards work. And in this research, we were interested in patterns. So we are interested in patterns of motivation, operationalized through passion, and also contextual resources. And we have conducted two studies. The first study is a national survey of working adults across industries in the United States. And we have used Qualtrics panels to recruit a demographically representative sample of the US working population and also representative of industries. So we used quotas to get representation by industry to reflect industries across the economy. And the sample was approximately 14,000 people. And then study two was an industry-specific sample of hospital workers from 5 hospitals in Ontario, Canada. And they were in diverse roles. So they were in both administrative roles and clinical roles. And the sample of hospitals itself was quite diverse in nature. So there was a small and a medium-sized community hospital, very large, urban teaching hospital, and then 2 specialized ones, one psychiatric hospital and one rehabilitation center. So really covering the industry of healthcare. And this was a sample of just under 5,000 individuals. And what did we measure? Well, we measured passion according to the model that I have described. And then in that domain of autonomy, we measured individual voice. So we asked questions about people's ability to share their opinions, to make suggestions, to raise questions or problems in their teams. And then we measured support for creativity. In the first study, we asked questions about organizational support for creativity. And in the second study, more immediate in one's teams, supervisor support for creativity. Both studies assessed self-reported creative behavior, and study two also assessed creative self-efficacy. We also had a measure of employee-rated supervisor creative behavior, but because we are very tight on time, I'm not going to go into that today. So what did we find? First, all 3 of these variables, passion, support for creativity, and individual voice, were positively correlated. And we wanted to see whether we can identify patterns, intra-individual patterns. And we found, yes, we can do that, and we can identify 6 different clusters of individuals. These numbers above are showing percentages, how many people fit in each of these clusters. This cluster of all 3 variables being very low, we tentatively call the alienated cluster, and this one is the ideal cluster with all 3 variables being very high. 2 additional ones are similar in nature, but more moderate in magnitude. I did not mean to do that. And then there are 2 additional clusters where there is a difference in support for creativity and voice, and sort of around average passion. So what did we find in relation to creativity at work? How do these clusters differ? The first thing we found was sort of to be expected and relatively obvious. The lowest self-reported creativity was found for that alienated cluster, the highest for the ideal cluster. But it's also interesting where we didn't find differences. And we didn't find differences, these are corresponding to the clusters. We didn't find differences in the clusters that differ in support for creativity, but have similarly high voice. So that was an interesting contextual factor we identified there. In the second study, we identified 5 clusters using latent profile analysis. Again, we had that alienated cluster and the ideal cluster. Similarly, we had the cluster that differed in support for creativity and voice. So what did we find there in terms of our creativity outcomes? First thing we found is that the lowest creativity outcomes were where you would expect them. They were in those clusters that had very low voice and very low passion. But again, there was interesting in where we didn't find differences. So here we see that there were no differences in creative self-efficacy between clusters that these 2 last clusters, the ideal one, so where all 3 variables were high, and also the one that had low support for creativity. So think about it, that people still think they can be creative, they're just not being supported at work. And also, we didn't find differences in creative behavior, self-reported creative behavior, for those clusters that had similar levels of passion and voice, but differed in support of creativity. So that brings us really to the conclusions. Well, passion predicts creativity. We have found that all of 3 of these variables correlated with our creativity outcomes, but it also matters, the context also matters. An individual voice can compensate for relatively low passion. Key here is a variable that we did not measure, but we know from previous research that is related to both creativity outcomes and voice behaviors at work, psychological safety, which can be an important direction for future work. And I'd like to thank all of you and our funders and conclude for today.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Nadine Maliakel. I'm here with the University of Nebraska at Omaha, as well as Hogan Assessment Systems. And I'm here to give you guys a talk I've titled, Taking the Creative with the Suite, Examining Leader Rank, Gender, and Creative Reputations. I want to give a quick shout out to my collaborators, Jessica McDuffie, Chase Winterberg, and Matthew Lemming of Hogan Assessment Systems. You guys are awesome. Standard research agenda presentation going on here. I'll go over some literature, talk about the method results, and then go right into the discussion. And to start, we'll start with a definition of creativity. Basically, what this slide boils down to is creativity is the production of an idea that's considered both novel and useful. And as this definition highlights, we can really go into understanding creativity across 4 different camps. There's the creative process, which is how we are creative, the creative person, which regards who is creative, the creative product, which regards what do we deem creative, and the press, the creative press, is the environment in which creativity happens. Today's presentation is primarily in the camp of the creative person area, because we'll be looking at leadership creative personalities. Now, there's a couple ways we can go about understanding creative personalities and personality in general at that. One way is through the identity approach, and that is really all about how we see ourselves. It's how we view our own personality. It's what we discuss to others on what we think of our personality. And to put it in the context of creativity, it's how we see ourselves as creatives. Reputation, on the other hand, takes a different approach. It's how others view you. It's how others view your personality, how others view you as a creative. And that's exactly the approach we took with this research here. We're going to be taking a look at reputation approach of leaders' creative personalities. Now let's bring in some organizational side of things and more leadership stuff in here. You guys are all here at 8 a.m. on a Friday at SIOP. I don't think I need to tell you guys that creativity is important and increasingly important in this knowledge-based economy, but I just did. And so, you know, creativity, important for innovation, important for maintaining a competitive advantage. We also saw the power of creativity come about with novel circumstances, never before seen circumstances with COVID-19. In addition to creativity just being generally important for employees, we've also have researchers saying that creativity is considered a critical skill for leaders, and that's because leaders are often facing novel, complex, ambiguous problems. Researchers have argued that the nature of these problems increases in terms of novelty, complexity, and ambiguity as they move up the corporate ladder, and so it makes you wonder, is creativity a little bit more important for those especially at the top? Now, there's not a lot of empirical evidence linking leader rank and creativity, but I want you guys to go on this journey with me and think about leaders of the upper echelon. Maybe those characteristics of those leaders coincide with what we think of when we think of a creative person. Maybe you think of someone who's visionary, someone who's willing to challenge the status quo, come up with a lot of ideas. Maybe they're a little bit more self-directed and just overall comfortable with going against the norm. And if that doesn't work for you guys, I did a poster a few years ago that found a positive relationship between organizational rank and creativity, which is really why I kind of dove into this research here for you guys today. To bring in the gender side of things, creativity research generally shows that there's no clear, meaningful gender differences in creativity. However, recently, a couple of articles have come about finding support that men are not only perceived, but also evaluated as more creative, as well as innovative compared to women. Now, we all know that gendered biases already are present in the leadership space, and that those gender biases are a bit more are in favor of men, but also more pronounced at the top. And so we wondered, you know, to what extent are women being viewed as less creative compared to men, and is that difference more pronounced at higher levels of leadership compared to lower levels of leadership? And that really brings in the main effects and the interaction effect that we hypothesized. We essentially wanted to know, do C-suite leaders have significantly higher creative reputation scores compared to non-C-suite leaders? Do male leaders have higher scores compared to female leaders? And when we look at the interaction effect, are we seeing that C-suite leaders have higher creative reputation scores compared to non-C-suite leaders, but males having higher creative reputation scores across both levels? And so to examine this, we looked at a sample of 4,824 US leaders. About 70% of those leaders were male and 40% were in the C-suite. And these leaders at some point or another took Hogan's 3 personality assessments, the Hogan HPI, so the Hogan Personality Inventory, the HDS, the Hogan Development Survey, and the MVPI, the Motives, Values, and Preferences Inventory. And what we did was we took 5 scales across these 3 assessments that indicate a creative behavioral repertoire, and that includes high ambition, low prudence, high inquisitive, high imaginative, and high aesthetic. So we created a composite score with those scales. And we basically ran a 2x2 ANOVA, and we found the main effect for leader ranks such that C-suiters had higher creative reputation scores compared to non-C-suiters. We didn't find a main effect for leader gender, and we did find an interaction effect between leader rank and leader gender, but just not in the way that we expected. And so given the pattern of findings you guys are seeing here, we wanted to probe this a little bit further by looking at the creative reputation scores between C-suiters and non-C-suiters and splitting it by gender for the sample. So we looked at male leaders only and found that there was no significant difference in creative reputations across C-suite and non-C-suite leaders. However, we did find a significant relationship when looking at this in just the female sample. And this really begs the question of why we saw the effect that we did. Why are we seeing a significant difference in C-suite versus non-C-suite in the female sample only? Now, this is just one potential reason. We just looked at group differences here, but it could be that creative reputations amongst female leaders, when they're exceptionally creative, they're finding themselves in the C-suite space. Whereas for male leaders, their creative reputation's not really showing up in that same pattern. It's not necessarily making a difference on where they're ending up in the corporate ladder. Now, again, just group differences, but I bring this up given recent research that has found evidence for a qualifications gap, meaning that women not only have to be more qualified than men to land the job, but exceptionally qualified to land the job. And so is that something we're seeing here? This research particularly cannot tell us that, again, group differences, but it is a thought given recent research findings. And I really need to say that, replication is of course needed here, and as well as a more robust research design to be able to understand why this interaction effect happened. And that brings me to limitations and future directions. I want to point out the small effect sizes that we had. However, I think they're still worth noting given the practical nature of this work. I also want to highlight that this research is really a first crack at examining these relationships. And as I mentioned earlier, replication is important, but in terms of future research directions, it may be important to look at specific leadership roles and their creativity requirements, maybe tie in leadership performance, or even link that selection and promotion rates to really understand that interaction effect. And as my creativity colleagues have already discussed, we really need to unpack the role of gender in the creativity space. And I'll add to that and say, given the wealth of research we have on leadership and gender, that we also acknowledge the leadership space in this as well. I also want to highlight that we did look, as a future direction, I just remembered, is we looked into main effects and the interaction effect across 3 different industries, so healthcare, information technology, and manufacturing. We didn't find significant main effects or interaction effects, but I think it's still a worthwhile avenue to explore given our understanding of the industry in the leadership and gender space. In terms of final thoughts to leave you guys with, I think it's important, as we've all sort of said at one point or another in the creativity gender spaces, we need to acknowledge the creativity of all employees equally, especially when there's a high premium on creativity as a skill. I also want to highlight that we should be aware of any potential stricter standards being placed on women leaders as creatives. If this qualifications gap is truly something that's going on, understanding the influence of that on selection, promotion, succession planning, especially in organizations that prize creativity, that value creativity and innovation, it's just something to be aware of, especially in terms of women leadership. And thank you guys for being here again at 8 a.m.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. So hello everybody, my name is Kevin Mitchell. I am here from Omaha, Nebraska, representing Nebraska Medicine. And I am very, very lucky to be the last presenter here because they've set a wonderful stage for me to look at differences in leader rank, and then we were interested in the differences or potential differences in leader role in a specific industry, and that industry being healthcare within a very specific hospital. And so where I want to set the stage of why are we talking about healthcare, and what you see on the screen here is you should see a number of stats. And the takeaway from this slide, and really what I would like to share with you, is that in the US, most of you or most adults in the US interact with the healthcare space. We spend a lot of money in the healthcare space. We employ a lot of people in the healthcare space. And that growth in the healthcare space is very, very rapid in this decade. And so innovation can play a really, really key role in helping operations and breakthroughs in the medical and care. But if I were to ask all of you to really think about healthcare and think about innovation, my guess is that many of you would probably think of vaccines or maybe new operation models or operating models to deal with the pandemic. And that's something that's really important when it comes to healthcare and innovation. We tend to see this focus around medical breakthroughs, medical procedures, information systems, new technology. And that's all very, very important work as we, as a healthcare field, are advancing. However, there is a recognition that when we look at an organization, like a hospital specifically, we need to recognize that it's a complex and service-oriented organization, where we both have a big body of clinical staff that are direct patient care individuals, and then a large administrative staff, which are supporting those caretakers. And so there has been a recent shift, and even some work that one of my colleagues here has presented as well, of looking at frontline workers and frontline leaders. And especially in a hospital setting, that brings in an interesting context because clinical leaders have to reliably and highly reliably deliver patient care, but they also need to balance it with this appropriate risk-taking. It's kind of the old adage, you don't want your surgeon to get creative when you're under the knife. And so really what we were interested in was seeing, okay, do we have differences then in this context of nursing areas primarily versus areas outside of nursing? And then further, kind of building from some of the research you've already heard today, is this importance around leadership and creativity. Primarily moving up the organization, being faced with more ambiguous and complex problems, do we see differences in the creative personality when we look at our frontline leaders and moving up the corporate organization and how that informs talent management practices? And the reason we really talk about it at Nebraska Medicine is for two reasons. What you see on the screen here is one of our core values of innovation. We expect everyone to be innovative at Nebraska Medicine. And then on top of that, our leadership competencies, which we call the essentials, it's very clear that we have drives innovation. So not only is everyone expected, we expect our leaders to be innovators, to be on the lookout and to find and to be able to find novel ways of improving our delivery model. And so the way that we looked at this was two talent management kind of areas. One was our selection assessments, where we looked at our frontline leaders, those being supervisors, and then their one up in the hierarchy being managers. Majority nursing and majority female, not surprising given a hospital context here. But the other data that we wanted to look at was this developmental data within the manager rank, both from an assessment component where they have a developmental assessment, but then they also have 360 feedback that comes back from their direct reports, themselves, and then also their director or their leader around certain behaviors that they're performing. This population, majority non-nursing, and again, mostly female. So the way that we looked at this from an assessment standpoint was very similar to what Nadine had shared, is that we grounded ourselves in the theory of what we would anticipate which kind of personality characteristics would lead someone to be more creative or a creative person, that being higher openness, lower conscientiousness, and a higher internal locus of control. And so for both of our selection assessments and our developmental assessments, we were able to form an index of those three personality characteristics to examine the differences. In the developmental 360, we were able to form an index around behaviors that were rated by direct reports, by themselves, and by their leader, the director. And then we split it by manager versus supervisor, and then we split it by nursing and non-nursing. And so when we look at this, we found an effect across leader rank. So very similar to kind of what you've heard from the other presenters here today and their findings, is that we tend to find that the higher ranked leader, in this case the manager, tends to showcase or display higher creative personality indices. No significant difference between nursing and non-nursing, which I think is actually a good sign, meaning that we have kind of a potential or creative potential in both areas that can still operate and really drive creativity and innovation forward. And there's no significant kind of dependent or interaction effect here. What's interesting is as we turn to the development data, because now we have both a self-report assessment and we have rated behaviors from other individuals. And so when we look at that, it was not significant for their own ratings or their direct report ratings around innovative behaviors, but their director was correlated with that personality indice around innovation. And so really, from being a practitioner and being a talent management practitioner, so what does this all mean? How do we use it, and really how do we leverage this? One of the things within Nebraska Medicine is that supervisor rank is fairly new within our organization. And what tended to happen was we had really great technical experts that we put into role, and they still operated kind of in that realm of doing, rather than really coming up and I would say being more strategic or more innovative at that front rank. And that's fine. That is completely fine for what we needed them to be and to do at the front ranks. However, what this means is that we need to understand as talent management professionals of saying, if that's what we have from a personality standpoint, what do we do when it comes to those being our next up leaders? How do we form our development programs to really understand and support our leaders? Because if we're going to start asking them to be more innovative as they go up, how do we arm them with the tools, the structure, the decision making that can allow them to be and support them in being innovative and driving innovation at the organization? And part of that, I think, a piece of data that came out of this was really leveraging our directors. Our directors seem to have some sort of eye or understanding of that type of innovative behavior, of leading through vision, of risk-taking. Luckily, they are already heavily involved in our succession planning. And so as we look and identify areas where we need innovation in the hospital, where we need to see that growth and kind of the novelty appear, the director level can be a really, really critical role in weaving this together of understanding not only the personality of our individuals from a creativity sense and innovation sense, but really how do we support and how do we use and leverage the other leaders to help identify and put the right people in the right role at the right time so we can continue to be innovative and creative as an organization. Just want to thank everybody for taking time today. I'm going to hand it over to Ronnie, who will wrap us up.
I'm going to give this to you, so I'm going to stand up top. Okay, so again, 8 a.m. And I'm supposed to listen to all of this and draw some conclusions here. So a few things. First of all, we had a variety of talks, which to me, the interesting piece was we hit all the highlights as a creativity researcher. So how do we measure creativity? We have a measure of creative process that we're through a game. We have self-assessments. We have reputation. We have creative personality. We have supervisor ratings. All of the ways we can think about to assess creativity. One of the studies used that one. That's great. We had some information about individual differences related to creativity, so both the focus on the creative process and the thinking process associated with creativity, which is great, instead of a focus on an outcome, because people can think creatively, but it doesn't always lead to a creative outcome. It's more likely to lead to a creative outcome, but it's not a given. We talked about passion. So motivation to be creative, which is important as an individual difference variable. The environment in which people work. Do they have support for creativity? That came up in a number of studies. We know that support for creativity from leaders, from the organization, is critical for creativity and creative success. You could have a creative person, but if they don't have the support, they're not going to voice their ideas. You're not going to be able to capitalize on them. Voice is part of that. While it is an individual difference variable, it is influenced greatly by the environment in which the individual is in. And thank you, Zorana, for mentioning one of my favorite constructs, psychological safety. The other piece is the level of leadership. What is required to be creative, or what we look for in terms of creativity at different levels of leadership, at different levels in the workplace, and different positions and occupations. So I love the robot game. I don't think it would work well in healthcare, right? So what we look for in terms of leadership, in terms of skills, in terms of expertise, and how we then develop our assessments, whether they're evaluations of creativity for selection or performance, or evaluating the environment for creativity, that would change based on the type of position you are in, the rank that you have, and finding gender differences. I'm still trying, Nadine and I talked about this before, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around that particular finding, which I find absolutely fascinating. Don't have a good solution for that one, so we really need to continue to evaluate that in the future. And I want to allow some time for questions. I think we have 4 minutes. So If anybody has a question, we'll jump with the mic. No? Oh my goodness. It's really early in the morning then, I guess, right? Oh.
Yeah, happy to jump in here. I guess most of the time I hear industry leaders talk about creating a innovative workplace, whatever. They mean feedback chairs and a whiteboard room. I'm just curious, like, what do you wish leaders knew or think about their own use beyond beanbag chairs? Oh, thank you.
So what can leaders do to facilitate creativity? And what do we know from science about leadership and how they can facilitate creativity? I know I can talk about this, but
Well, I think support is really, really instrumental, but knowing how to go about support in terms of when you want a bunch of ideas to work with, and then when you go about evaluating and then implementing. So if leaders could understand that their support is instrumental at the various processes required to get to that creative outcome, that would be awesome, in my opinion.
yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk again. So my question, I guess, is for anyone, and I guess it's on the measurement of creativity. And so I was wondering if, do y'all have a sense of whether we should be striving to develop measures of, maybe generalized dimensions of creativity that can apply across all types of jobs and contexts, or should we be focusing on developing measures that are job specific or even task specific?
I think you asked the most loaded question of the morning there. I think any one of us would be very, very happy to talk through kind of those measures. When we think of creativity, at least in my camp, I believe that everyone has the potential and the possibility to be creative, kind of the everyday creativity. But when we're talking about talent management processes and talent management measurement, I would lean on the side of if you can make it more job specific, more real to what they're trying to achieve, what you're asking them to achieve, that would probably be the gold standard of kind of creativity measurement. I'll let my other colleagues jump in.
This is a topic very dear to my heart, and I think very important one. I think that whenever the question is either or in psychology, the answer is both. So there are good reasons to assess things, attributes that are general to creativity. And here we have touched on personality in several presentations, and attributes related to openness to experience are really general to creativity in every domain, in every kind of task. That is one very solid finding we have. But once you want to go into assessment that is specific for a job, and we had a great example there with the engineers, you want to get something that is more specific to the task, right? The robot task would not be appropriate in healthcare, and it would be appropriate in engineering. And you want to have kind of a balance of both. And that might be practically difficult. So starting with something general might be easier, but depending on your purposes, especially if the purpose is selection, you also want to have something that is more specific.
I would add from like a industry hiring standpoint, like our robots task is really oriented to new college grads, internship programs, because our more senior engineers, they're coming from a lot of other bigger tech companies, and they have resumes that kind of demonstrate a lot of, or evidence their creative problem-solving abilities, or we can interview them and they have very practical experience where they can walk us through and show examples of their the things they have done to be creative, where you don't really have that with interns and new college grads. So like this engineering-oriented hiring assessment gives them a space to begin to demonstrate those skills when they may not have historic experience or practical kind of hands-on jobs to speak to. So the context of, who do you want to assess, really helps to determine, what type of measure you're going to use and how you're going to go about measuring creativity.
And I just want to add that one of the things that we tend to forget about creativity is that creativity requires expertise. And without it, we cannot be creative. So that's why we see those job-specific requirements that are coming up. And I think we are at time, so a plug to at 9 o'clock, we have another creativity session. So follow us.